The morning they told me I might die, my wife was getting her hair done. I know this because she texted me a photo at 10:47 a.m. Loose waves framing her face, lipstick already perfect, that smile she only wore when she wanted something from someone. "Wish me luck today, babe," the caption read. I was lying in a hospital gown with 2 IVs in my arm and a cardiac monitor beeping steadily beside my head, and my wife of 9 years was texting me selfies from a salon. Let me back up. My name is Mark Callahan. For most of our marriage, I was the quiet engine behind everything Lisa Callahan, formerly Lisa Reyes, had built. She was a cardiothoracic surgeon. Brilliant, magnetic, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made everyone immediately aware that she was the most accomplished person in it. I was a mid-level project manager at a construction firm when we met. She was a resident pulling 80-hour weeks, surviving on vending machine coffee and sheer stubbornness. I was the one who cooked dinner at midnight when she got home. I was the one who managed our finances, tracked her continuing education credits, coordinated her schedule when the hospital's administrative systems failed her. I built her website when she went private practice. I edited every grant application she ever submitted. I negotiated the lease on her first clinic. She used to call me her foundation. Said she couldn't have built any of it without me. I believed her. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was trusting that when she said, "Daniel is just an old friend," she meant it. Daniel Mercer, vascular surgeon. Her ex from medical school, the one she'd dated for 3 years before they split because of what she called incompatible ambitions. He'd moved to Boston after their breakup, then to London, then apparently back to the States 2 years ago when he took a position at Northwestern. I'd met him exactly once, at a medical gala 4 years into our marriage. Tall guy, easy smile, the kind of handshake that feels like a statement. Lisa had laughed a little too easily around him that night. I'd noticed but said nothing because I trusted her. That was the third mistake. She'd been seeing him for 14 months. I only know the exact duration because of what I found later. At the time, all I knew was that on the morning of March 14th, I collapsed at my office with what turned out to be a severe cardiac arrhythmia and was rushed to St. Michael's Medical Center by ambulance. My colleague Paul rode with me in the back and held my hand while the paramedics worked. My wife was called at 9:03 a.m. by the hospital's emergency contact system. She did not come. The attending physician, Dr. Renee Walsh, told me later that they'd reached Lisa's phone. Lisa had confirmed she received the message. The hospital documented it because they needed surgical consultation. Ironic, a cardiothoracic surgeon being the emergency contact for a cardiac patient, and Lisa had said, and I am quoting from the hospital's intake notes because I requested them later, "I have a prior commitment today. Please keep me updated." A prior commitment. I was in and out of consciousness for most of that morning. When I surfaced enough to form coherent thoughts around noon, Paul was still there, sitting in the plastic chair beside my bed, working from his laptop because he'd refused to leave. The nurse told me my wife had called to check in at 11:30 a.m. She hadn't asked to speak to me. She'd just asked if I was stable, been told yes, and apparently taken that as permission to remain wherever she was. Where she was, I would learn later, was at the wedding of Daniel Mercer and a trauma surgeon named Patricia Kane. She was not just a guest. She was the maid of honor. For a woman whose ex-boyfriend was marrying someone else, she seemed remarkably invested in the occasion. The truth came out the way these things always do, sloppily, accidentally, through a series of small failures that the universe assembled into an unavoidable revelation. I was discharged after 3 days with a monitor, a fistful of prescriptions, and strict orders to rest. Lisa picked me up from the hospital. She was warm, solicitous, held my hand in the car, said all the right things about being scared and relieved. I was too medicated and too exhausted to interrogate the timeline. I let myself be held, but that night, while Lisa slept, I couldn't. The monitor on my chest kept me half awake, and at 2 a.m. I found myself sitting in the kitchen with a glass of water, and that's when her phone lit up on the counter with a message preview before the screen locked. Yesterday was everything. I'll never forget it. I know things are complicated but I can't pretend anymore. I love you, Lisa. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't wake her up. I put my glass in the sink and went back to bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about 14 years. We'd been together 5 years before the wedding, 9 years married. I'd given her the best years of my career, restructured my professional life around her schedule, deferred our conversations about children because she wasn't ready, moved across the city when she needed to be closer to the hospital, and somewhere in all of that, I had apparently become furniture. In the morning, she made me breakfast and fussed over my pills and kissed my forehead before she left for the clinic. I watched her go and thought, she genuinely believes this is fine. She has categorized what she's doing and found a way to make it acceptable to herself, and she believes I will never know, and she is going to come home tonight and make dinner and ask how I'm feeling and I am supposed to be grateful. I am not a man who makes decisions out of pure emotion. I've been accused of being too controlled, too methodical. Lisa used to say it as a compliment, Mark thinks things through, and later, I suspect, as a complaint. But sitting at my kitchen table with a cardiac monitor on my chest and the ghost of that text message in my head, I made a very calm, very clear decision. I was going to find out everything, and then I was going to burn it all down. The first call I made was to my college roommate, Tom Vega, who was now a private investigator working mostly corporate cases out of Chicago. I told him what I knew and what I suspected. He told me to sit tight and not do anything visible. Don't confront her yet, he said. Don't change your behavior. You want the full picture before you move. I sat tight for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Lisa bringing me tea and adjusting my monitor and sleeping beside me and kissing me goodbye in the mornings while she was, as Tom's surveillance would confirm, meeting Daniel Mercer at a hotel near the hospital on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. The 2 hours in her schedule she'd always told me were reserved for peer review meetings. Tom gave me a file on a Tuesday evening. Photos. Hotel records. Texts pulled from a data recovery service after I'd gotten Lisa's iCloud credentials. She used the same password for everything. Her mother's birthday. I'd known it for years. The texts went back 14 months. They were detailed and damning and occasionally tender in a way that was somehow worse than if they'd been purely physical. She'd written to him about our marriage. About me. She'd called me stable and safe, and once, in a message that I've since committed to memory in the way you memorize things that change you, the responsible choice I made when I was afraid. The responsible choice. I had a follow-up cardiology appointment the day after Tom gave me the file. Dr. Walsh reviewed my monitor data, adjusted one of my medications, and told me I was recovering well but needed to keep stress low for another 4 to 6 weeks. I told her I would do my best. Then I went home and started making a list. Here's what most people don't understand about being married to a high-earning professional for 9 years: you know where everything is. I knew Lisa's practice inside out because I had helped build it. I knew her financial accounts because we had a joint investment portfolio I'd managed for 7 years. I knew her professional relationships because I had attended every event, drafted every thank you note, remembered every colleague's spouse's name. I knew her legal situation because I had sat beside her when she signed every contract her practice had ever entered. What Lisa had never fully reckoned with was that I had not merely supported her empire. In many ways, I had constructed the scaffolding that held it up. I started with a divorce attorney. A good one, Catherine Chen at Mercer and Holt, who had a reputation for being precise and merciless in high-asset cases. I walked into her office with Tom's file and 9 years of financial documentation, and she looked at everything for 20 minutes in silence before she looked up and said, "This is very thorough." "I've had time to prepare," I said. We filed the following week. Illinois is a marital property state. 9 years of marriage, significant documented financial contribution on my part to her practice and professional development, and a very clear paper trail of my involvement in building what she'd built. Catherine estimated my claim on the marital estate was substantial, but divorce proceedings take time, and I wasn't interested in waiting for the legal system to do all the work for me. Lisa's private practice, the Callahan Cardiac Care Center, which she had named after us both as a gesture of partnership that now felt like a bad joke, had 4 major revenue streams: private patients, hospital referral contracts with 2 regional health systems, a research grant she'd received from a medical foundation, and a medical education partnership with a local university where she ran a seminar series twice a year. I didn't touch the patient care. I want to be clear about that. Whatever I felt about Lisa personally, I would not interfere with anyone's medical treatment. That was a line I would not cross. Everything else was fair game. The hospital referral contracts, I knew the administrators at both health systems. Over 7 years of gala dinners and charity events, I had cultivated those relationships personally. I reached out to both of them, not to say anything against Lisa, but simply to introduce them to information they didn't know, that the practice was about to undergo significant administrative restructuring due to a change in ownership status, and that they might want to review the terms of their contracts before the next renewal cycle. Both administrators, being careful institutional managers, initiated their own reviews. Neither renewed automatically. The research grant, the medical foundation that had funded Lisa's research, had a conflict of interest policy that required grant recipients to disclose any personal relationships with other grant recipients. Daniel Mercer, as it happened, had received a small grant from the same foundation 3 years prior. Their relationship, which was now 14 months documented, had not been disclosed. I sent the foundation's ethics office a politely worded letter with supporting documentation. They opened an inquiry. The university partnership, Lisa's seminar series, was popular and well regarded, but it was administered through a department head who happened to be a personal friend of mine. We'd been on the university's alumni fundraising committee together for 2 years. I didn't ask him to do anything improper. I simply let him know, privately, that Lisa was going through a significant personal situation and that her schedule might be uncertain in the coming months. He appreciated the heads up. The department began quietly exploring backup facilitators. None of this was illegal. None of it was even particularly aggressive, by the standards of what was available to me. It was simply the careful, methodical application of 9 years of relationship capital that Lisa had apparently assumed belonged to her by default. The social piece was Tom's suggestion, though I would have gotten there eventually. She went to his wedding, Tom said, when we talked through the plan. She left you in the hospital to be his maid of honor. People in your social circle don't know that. They didn't. The official story was that Lisa had been at a professional conference. I had been too ill and too stunned in the immediate aftermath to correct anyone, and Lisa had certainly never volunteered the truth, but the truth had documentation. The wedding had been covered by a society photographer. There were photos, including several prominent ones of Lisa in a dove-gray bridesmaid dress, laughing with the groom. I sent those photos, with a brief factual explanation of the timeline, to 4 people, our mutual friend couple the Harmons, who were deeply embedded in Chicago's medical social scene, Lisa's closest friend from residency, Janet, the chief of surgery at St. Michael's, who was Lisa's primary professional champion, and Lisa's mother, Donna, who had always adored me and whom Lisa had always wanted to impress. I didn't editorialize. I simply shared the facts. Lisa was Daniel Mercer's maid of honor on March 14th. I was transported to St. Michael's by ambulance at 9:18 a.m. on March 14th. The hospital contacted Lisa at 9:03 a.m. She arrived at St. Michael's to collect me on March 17th. I let people draw their own conclusions. The conclusions they drew were swift and, from what I heard through the grapevine, fairly volcanic. I was staying with my brother, Kevin, by the time Lisa found out I'd filed. Kevin lived in a 3-bedroom house in Evanston with his wife, Angela, and their 2 kids, and they'd insisted I come stay after my cardiac episode. I'd taken the guest room and spent my days working from a laptop and talking to Catherine and building my documentation file and taking my medications and, slowly, getting better. Lisa called me 47 times in the 3 days after she was served. I answered on the 48th. "You need to stop," she said. Her voice was different from anything I'd heard from her before. Not the warm register she used with me, not the crisp professional tone she used at the hospital. Something stripped and raw and almost unrecognizable. "Mark, you need to stop what you're doing. You're destroying everything." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it for a very specific and limited thing. "Which part are you asking me to stop? The divorce proceedings? The foundation inquiry? The conversation I had with the referral coordinators? You'll need to be specific." Silence. "Then, how did you, Lisa?" I kept my voice very even. "You left me in the hospital to be the maid of honor at your boyfriend's wedding. You texted me a selfie from the salon while they were running a cardiac monitor on me. I have 14 months of documentation of your relationship with Daniel Mercer. I have your texts. I have hotel records. I have the photos from the wedding." I paused. "Did you think I was just going to let that go?" "I was going to tell you," she said, and even now I'm not sure if she believed it. "Things were complicated. I was trying to find the right time. You found 14 months of wrong times," I said. "We're done, Lisa. My attorney will be your attorney's primary contact going forward." She came to Kevin's house. I looked at her through the front window and did not open the door. She stood on the porch for 11 minutes. Kevin stood beside me in the hallway with his arms crossed, not saying anything. Angela made coffee. After 11 minutes, Lisa got back in her car and left. She tried through Janet, who called me with an uncomfortable combination of sympathy and advocacy. She tried through Donna, who called me crying, which was the only call that genuinely hurt, because Donna was not at fault for any of this and she loved both of us. I told Donna that I was sorry, that I still cared for her, and that what her daughter had done was not something I could recover from. Donna cried harder and told me she understood. She also told me, which I had not asked for but received as confirmation, that Lisa had been distant and preoccupied for over a year, that she'd mentioned Daniel Mercer's name several times in passing, and that Donna had worried but hadn't known how to raise it. "I should have said something," Donna told me. "It wasn't your responsibility," I said. And I meant that too. The medical community is a smaller world than it looks from the outside. Within 2 weeks of my sending those photos, the story had propagated through most of the social and professional circles Lisa operated in. The chief of surgery at St. Michael's called her in for a conversation I was not privy to but heard about through a reliable mutual acquaintance. It was not, by all accounts, a comfortable meeting. The hospital's ethics committee takes a dim view of attending physicians who are unreachable for non-emergency personal reasons when their emergency contacts are admitted to the same facility. There were no formal sanctions, but there was a documented conversation and a note in her file. Daniel Mercer's new wife, Patricia, learned about the affair approximately 3 weeks after I sent those photos. I did not contact Patricia directly, that felt unnecessarily cruel to someone who was also a victim here. But in a social circle that tight, with that much documentation in circulation, the information found its way. I heard that Patricia's discovery happened at a dinner party hosted by mutual hospital colleagues, which was both more public and more devastating than I would have chosen. But I hadn't engineered the setting, only the release of the information, and I found it difficult to generate much guilt over that. Daniel and Patricia separated within the month. Here is the thing about watching your carefully constructed revenge plan unfold from the guest bedroom of your brother's house in Evanston. It is not as satisfying as you expect it to be, in the moment. Or rather, it is satisfying, but it coexists with something heavier. I was sleeping 8 hours a night, which I hadn't done in years. I was cooking dinner with Angela on Tuesdays, making my grandmother's red sauce, something Lisa had always said smelled too strong, so I'd stopped making it sometime around year 4 of our marriage. I was reading again. I was walking by the lake in the mornings, slowly at first because of the cardiac restriction, then longer as the weeks passed. The heavier thing was grief, not for Lisa, or not primarily for her, but for the version of my life I had believed I was living. 9 years of a story that turned out to have a different plot than the one I thought. That is a specific kind of loss that doesn't have a clean name. You don't mourn a person the same way when you're also mourning an illusion. It gets complicated. My cardiologist, Dr. Walsh, suggested therapy. I took her advice, which was something the pre-March version of me probably wouldn't have done. Her name was Dr. Patricia Osei, a calm and incisive woman who had a talent for asking questions that removed the available escape routes from self-deception. We talked twice a week. It helped. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings moved forward. Catherine was thorough in the way that good attorneys are thorough, anticipating arguments, closing doors, building a record that would hold up under challenge. Lisa's attorney, a well-regarded family law partner named Gerald Hughes, made several opening positions that Catherine systematically dismantled using documentation I had provided. The financial contribution case was strong. I had records of every grant application I'd edited, every vendor I'd negotiated with, every administrative system I'd built or improved for the practice. I had emails going back to the clinic's founding where Lisa had explicitly credited me for specific contributions. Mark handled the whole lease negotiation, read one email to her business manager from 2018. I'd be nowhere without his financial oversight, read another to a colleague from 2019. I was nowhere without his financial oversight. Gerald Hughes tried to argue that my contributions were the ordinary kind that spouses make to each other's careers, not compensable in a division of marital assets. Catherine put a forensic accountant on the stand during preliminary proceedings who valued my documented contributions to the practice at somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 in labor and expertise over 9 years, not counting the indirect financial benefits to the practice from my management of our joint assets. Gerald Hughes tried a different approach after that. The foundation inquiry concluded 3 months into the proceedings. Lisa was required to return the grant funds, approximately $90,000, and was placed on a 2-year ineligibility list for future foundation funding. The finding wasn't a scandal in the legal sense, but it was public record, and in her professional community, public record is reputation. The hospital referral contracts lapsed at their renewal dates. Lisa's practice lost both of them within 6 months of my initial conversation with the administrators. I heard she'd hired a business development consultant to try to replace the revenue, which struck me as overdue. The university terminated the seminar partnership when Lisa missed 2 scheduled sessions during the chaos of the divorce proceedings. She'd been reliable for years, 2 misses in close succession, combined with the general awareness of her situation in the professional community, was enough for the department to finalize the transition to other facilitators they'd already been exploring. By month 4, the Callahan Cardiac Care Center was still operational, still treating patients, but its administrative infrastructure was under strain in ways that Lisa had never had to manage before. She'd always had me. Now she had a practice manager she'd hired in a hurry who didn't know the systems, and a business consultant who didn't know the relationships, and a reputation that had accumulated several visible dents. I will tell you what I didn't do. I didn't enjoy her struggling. I want to be accurate about this. I did not take pleasure in the clinical difficulties or the administrative chaos in a straightforward way. What I felt was something more like justice in its purest, most abstract sense, the recognition that consequences were proportionate to actions, that the architecture of a life built partly on someone else's labor and trust was showing the weight of that debt now that the weight was no longer being carried. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I filed. The settlement was, in Catherine's word, significant. I received 40% of the practice's appraised value, the full balance of the joint investment portfolio we built over 9 years, the house, which I immediately sold and put in a new account, and a structured payment over 3 years that reflected the forensic accountant's valuation of my documented contributions. I walked out of the settlement conference on a Thursday in November and sat in Catherine's car in the parking garage and felt, for about 90 seconds, completely empty. Not sad. Not triumphant. Just empty, the way a room feels when you've moved all the furniture out and you can suddenly see how big it actually is. Then Catherine said, "You should eat something. There's a good Thai place 2 blocks from here." We ate Thai food and talked about the Cubs, and I tipped the server 30% because I could, because I had just secured a settlement that gave me financial stability for years, because I was alive and out and the chapter was closed. I had started, during the months of the divorce proceedings, to think about what I actually wanted to do with my professional life. I was 41. Project management at a construction firm had been fine, good pay, stable, but I'd always treated it as the day job that funded the life, and the life had for so long been organized around Lisa that I'd never fully reckoned with what I wanted the day job to actually be. What I knew, from 9 years of helping Lisa run her practice, was that I was very good at building and managing the operational side of small professional practices. The scheduling systems, the vendor relationships, the grant applications, the financial oversight, the administrative architecture that allows skilled professionals to actually do their skilled work without drowning in logistics. Lisa had needed all of that and I provided it instinctively because I loved her and because I was good at it. I no longer loved her, but I was still good at it. I left the construction firm in January and started a consulting practice. Not medical specifically, broader than that, though medical practices became an unexpected specialty because the needs were so familiar. I spent the first 6 months working 18-hour days, which my cardiologist gave me a moderate talking to about, and I cut it back to 12. The business grew faster than I expected. By the end of the first year, I had 11 clients and had brought on 2 associates. Tom Vega called me in February, about 14 months after he'd first handed me that file in the parking lot of a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. "Heard something you might want to know," he said. "Tell me." Daniel Mercer. His divorce from Patricia finalized last month, and he's apparently been trying to get Lisa too. I don't know the exact status of it, but they've been talking again. Rumor is he wanted to pick up where they left off after his marriage blew up. I thought about that for a moment. And apparently Lisa turned him down. Word is she told him she'd lost too much already and wasn't in a position to take the risk. Tom paused. "Thought you'd find it interesting." I did find it interesting. What I found more interesting was that I found it less satisfying than I would have expected. She'd turned him down. She'd lost the relationship for which she'd sacrificed her marriage and her professional standing, and she'd been left holding the consequences alone. By any measure of narrative justice, that was a complete outcome. And yet, "Thanks, Tom," I said. "You doing okay?" he asked. He'd asked that, every call, since March. "Yeah," I said, "I actually am. I moved into a new apartment in Lincoln Park in the spring. Hardwood floors, big windows, a kitchen I actually cooked in. I got a dog, a 7-year-old greyhound named Theodore who'd been retired from racing and needed a quiet home. Theodore turned out to be an excellent companion, calm, dignified, slightly judgmental in his expressions, and entirely uninterested in drama. Kevin and Angela came for dinner in April and Angela cried a little looking at the apartment, which Kevin told her was embarrassing and which she told Kevin to shut up about. I made my grandmother's red sauce. Theodore accepted a small amount of bread from Angela's hand with great gravity. I realized that night after they left, genuinely happy. Not performatively happy, not recovery happy where you tell yourself you're fine and will it into being. Actually happy, in a quiet and solid way that I hadn't felt in longer than I could precisely identify. The cardiac monitor was long gone. I was running 3 miles in the mornings along the lake. The consulting practice was producing income that would let me take risks I'd always deferred. I had Kevin and Angela and their kids and Tom and a handful of friends I'd let fall away during the marriage and was slowly rebuilding with, and I had Theodore and a kitchen I could cook in. The thing about grief, Dr. Osei had said early in our sessions, is that it doesn't resolve in a straight line. It resolves in a spiral. You pass through the same territory repeatedly, but from a slightly higher position each time, until one day you look down and realize you're above it. I believed her by the time it was actually true. I saw Lisa once, before the encounter I'm about to describe. It was accidental, a fundraising dinner for a hospital foundation, November of the first year post-divorce, where I'd been invited in my capacity as a consultant who'd worked with several of the attending physicians' practices. She was across the room. She looked tired in a way that professional grooming couldn't entirely conceal, and her smile had the slight effortfulness of someone maintaining an appearance. She saw me. Neither of us moved toward the other. A colleague spoke to her and she turned away, and I did too, and that was the whole of it. The actual final encounter happened the following spring. I was having lunch at a restaurant in the West Loop with a potential new client, a pediatric group practice that wanted help restructuring their administrative operations. We'd finished eating and were settling the check when I heard her voice at a table near the entrance. Lisa was with 2 women I didn't recognize, colleagues or friends. She was, as I registered in the way you register things before you decide what to do with them, thinner than she'd been, and looked tired even in good light. But she was laughing at something one of the women had said, and for a moment she looked enough like the person I'd married that I felt the ghost of something. Then she turned and saw me. For a long second, neither of us moved. My client, a pleasant man named Dr. George Wong, was gathering his jacket and hadn't noticed. Lisa excused herself from her table and walked over. Her friends watched with the careful expression of people pretending not to watch. "Mark," she said. "Lisa." I stood because it seemed rude not to. "This is Dr. George Wong." George, my ex-wife, Dr. Lisa Reyes. She'd reverted to her maiden name after the divorce. George shook her hand with the pleasant obliviousness of someone who has no context. "Could I have a moment?" she asked. Her voice was very controlled. I told George I'd email him the follow-up materials and he left, and Lisa and I stood at the edge of the dining room in the particular intimacy of former spouses who are now strangers. "You look well," she said. "Thank you," I said. "How are you?" She was quiet for a moment. Not calculating, I thought. She seemed past calculation, or perhaps just too tired for it. I've wanted to say this for a while. What I did was wrong. Not the marriage ending, but the way I handled it. What I did that morning. She didn't say hospital. She didn't say your cardiac event. She just said that morning, and we both knew what she meant. I've had to live with that. I looked at her. I thought about the text she'd sent me from the salon. I thought about Dr. Walsh telling me they'd called and Lisa had said she had a prior commitment. I thought about Paul sitting in that plastic chair for 3 days. "Yes," I said. "You have." She waited, I think, for something else. Absolution, maybe. Or the opening for a longer conversation. But I had said what was accurate and there wasn't more that needed saying. "I hope things are going well for you," she said finally. "They are," I said. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Lisa. I mean that." And I did mean it, which surprised me when I heard myself say it. Not as a performance of magnanimity, not as a final turn of the knife. I genuinely, in that moment, had no particular investment in her suffering. She had made choices and paid for them and was living with that. So was I, in the opposite direction. I walked out into the April afternoon. The city was doing what it does in early spring, tentative green, light that has a warmth you'd forgotten was possible after winter, people on the sidewalks moving like they'd been released from something. I had a 3 o'clock call with a client and I needed to walk a few blocks to get a coffee first. I called Kevin on the way. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" "Nothing. Just saw Lisa. Thought I'd check in." "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. Yeah, I'm good. You want to come for dinner Sunday? Angela's making her mother's recipe, the lamb thing. I'll bring wine," I said. I ordered my coffee from a place 2 blocks from my apartment and walked home with Theodore waiting for me at the end of the afternoon. I'd gotten good at this, the ordinary contentment of a life that belongs to you. No one texting me selfies from salons while I'm in cardiac arrest. No one telling colleagues I was the responsible choice made out of fear. No one requiring me to diminish to make them fit better in the frame. I thought about what I'd built in the year since, the consulting practice with its 15 clients, the apartment with its good light, the friends I was rebuilding slowly and honestly, the dog asleep in a square of sun on the kitchen floor, the way I felt when I ran in the mornings along the lake with the water going silver in the early light. I heard from Tom, months later, that the Callahan Cardiac Care Center had been rebranded. Lisa had finally removed my name from it, which I thought was overdue and had no feeling about either way. I heard that she was dating someone, a non-medical professional, an architect, and that she seemed to be doing better. I noted this information the way you note weather in a city you no longer live in. Mildly relevant, quickly forgotten. What I know about those months, looking back from a distance, the revenge was real and it was warranted and it worked, in the specific sense that the consequences were proportionate to the actions and the scaffolding I'd built for someone who would leave me dying came down when I stopped holding it up. But the thing that actually mattered, the thing that changed the shape of my life, was not the dissolution of her empire. It was the construction of mine. The cardiac monitor had picked up an irregular rhythm and called it an emergency, and in the most literal sense it had been right. But I have come to think it was flagging something more than arrhythmia. It was flagging a life that had lost its own rhythm, that had been beating to someone else's time for so long it had forgotten what its own sounded like. I know what mine sounds like now. It sounds like Theodore's nails on hardwood floors at 6 a.m. It sounds like Kevin's kids arguing about something inconsequential at Sunday dinner. It sounds like a conference call with a client who just figured out a problem I helped them see. It sounds like my grandmother's red sauce on a Tuesday night, filling the apartment with the smell that belongs to me, not to anyone else's preference. Some mornings I run 5 miles before the city fully wakes up. The lake is cold and loud in spring, the water making its own arguments with the shore. I run until I'm warm all the way through and then I walk the last half mile back, cooling down, watching the light change. I am alive. I am present. I am building something that will not collapse if someone withdraws their support, because the foundations are mine. That's the whole story. Except it isn't the end, because stories only end in books. In actual life, you keep going. You have coffee. You call your brother. You feed the dog. And some mornings, not every morning, but enough, you think, I almost didn't get this. I almost didn't wake up to have this. And you are grateful, in the uncomplicated way of someone who knows exactly what they escaped. You walk home. The city opens up around you, green and loud and full of what's next. You go in.